feedback. The thing about avoidant exes is they're masters at staying in control by doing the bare minimum. They give just enough to keep you hopeful, but never enough to feel secure. Feedback. And you know what most people do in response? They chase, they reach out, they try to have one last conversation or find the perfect words to fix things. They send the long texts. Feedback. The voice notes, the late night, I miss you, message. Feedback. But if you really want to shift the dynamic, if you want to hit them where it actually makes them you feel something, you have to do the exact opposite. Silence is your superpower. Feedback. And not the kind of silence that's performative, the kind where you're secretly hoping or notice, or you're counting the days until they come crawling back. That's not real silence. Feedback. That's disguised attachment. I'm talking about the kind of silence that comes from genuine clarity, the clarity that says, I don't need to convince you of my value. You see, feedback. Avoidants are used to being the ones who retreat. They pull away, withdraw emotionally, become distant, and somewhere in the back of their mind, they expect you to try harder. Feedback. They know you're going to check in. They know you're going to circle back eventually. That's how they've trained you. Feedback. But when that pattern breaks, when the person they thought would always reach out suddenly goes quiet, it's not just confusing for them, it's destabilizing. Feedback. Because now they don't know where they stand. Now, or they're the one questioning what happened. And whether they show it or not, I promise you, they notice. That silence creates space, feedback for reflection, space for discomfort, space for their ego to realize it doesn't have the grip it once had on you. And more importantly, it gives you space, feedback, space to finally breathe without being tangled in their inconsistency. You stop reacting to the breadcrumbs and start realizing how you are actually receiving. The fog starts to lift. Feedback. And here's the beautiful parting. When you stop talking, your actions start to speak. You're not the one reaching out anymore. You're not the one checking their stories. Feedback. You're not engaging with their subtle bids for attention. And slowly, without saying a word, you're communicating something powerful. Feedback. I've stepped out of this game. And that's what ego doesn't see coming. Ego expects the cycle to continue. Ego expects the validation to stay on tap. Feedback. And when it's not there, when you take that supply away, there's a shift. Suddenly, they're not just avoiding all you, they're being avoided. Feedback. And that's not a position they're used to being in. Now, don't get me wrong. This isn't about punishing them. This isn't about playing games or pretending not to care. It's about choosing yourself so deeply that you no longer tolerate being someone's emotional afterthought. It's about choosing peace over chaos, dignity over desperation. Feedback. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy. There will be days when you want to break that silence, when you convince yourself that reaching out just once won't hurt. Feedback. When you think maybe this time they'll get it. But every time you break that silence for the sake of their comfort, you abandon yourself just a little more. Feedback. And that's what you stuck in the first place. So here's what I want you to do the next time you feel the urge to text, to explain, to clarify. Pause. Ask yourself who you're doing it for. Feedback. Ask yourself what you're hoping to get in return. And then remind yourself that silence is not a void. It's a message, a boundary. Feedback. A declaration that you are no longer participating in a dynamic that made you feel small. Let them wonder. Let them sit in the absence of your words. Feedback. Let them feel what it's like when you're no longer there to absorb their emotional avoidance. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is absolutely nothing. Feedback. When someone with an avoidant attachment style walks away or slowly disappears behind their wall of emotional distance, it can feel like a personal failure, like you weren't enough. Feedback. Like if only you'd done more, said less, shown more patience, dialed back your emotions, or held on a little tighter. Maybe then they would have stayed. Feedback. That mindset is exactly what keeps people stuck because it places your value in their hands when in reality they never truly saw the full picture of what you had to offer. You bid back, not because you didn't show it, because they weren't capable of receiving it. And here's where the shift begins. Most people focus on the wrong kind of revenge. Feedback. Try to make their ex jealous with new flings or dramatic displays of moving on. But the most effective, most disruptive thing you can do, feedback. Actually become the version of yourself they never got to meet. Not for them, not to get back at anyone, but because somewhere in the midst of all that pain, you forgot how powerful you are. Feedback. You forgot how magnetic you can be when you're not shrinking to make someone else comfortable. This isn't about slapping on a new outfit and hitting the gym for a week. Feedback. It's about something much deeper. It's about reconnecting with yourself at a soul level. Feedback. Because let's be honest, being with someone avoidant often means you've spent a lot of time walking on eggshells, trying to be palatable, easy, low maintenance. Feedback. You've twisted yourself into someone less emotional, more chill, someone more digestible, because that's what they needed to stay in the relationship. Feedback. But you can't keep editing yourself for love and then wonder why you feel so hollow when it ends. So now the goal isn't just to look better, it's to feel better. Feedback. To come back to your own emotional center, to tap back into the hobbies, passions, and friendships that may have been sidelined. Feedback. To surround yourself with people who don't make you feel like you're too much just for having a heart. You become magnetic again. Feedback. Not by trying to impress them, but by deeply impressing you yourself. And yes, part of that will include physical growth. You'll upgrade your environment, your style. Feedback. Your health, not because you need to prove anything, but because self-respect starts showing up where you carry yourself. Your presence shifts. Feedback. There's this quiet confidence that starts to build. You don't chase anymore because you don't need to. You've finally stopped outsourcing your worth. Feedback. That's what makes avoidant people uncomfortable, by the way. When they look back and realize the person they pushed away is no longer frozen in sadness, you're not the same. Feedback. You're not trying to win them back. You're no longer orbiting their emotional mood swings. You've stopped performing for their approval. Feedback. And let's talk about that for a second, because avoidants rarely have to face the consequences of their emotional distance. They just appear, and then months later, feedback. They resurface with a casual, "Hey, how have you been?" thinking they still have access to the old version of you, the one who waited back, the one who would have dropped everything for a breadcrumb of attention. But now, that version doesn't exist anymore because you've evolved. And maybe, just maybe, feedback, that's when they actually start to feel something. Not because you tried to hurt them, because they thought you'd never stop giving, never stop caring, never stop hoping. Feedback. And your evolution breaks that illusion. The irony is they often realize what they had right when it's no longer available. But that realization is theirs to sit with. Feedback. It's not your job to go backwards because they've finally caught up. Growth is only powerful when it's sustained, when it becomes your new normal back, not just a short-term strategy to get a reaction. So yes, glow up, but don't stop at the surface. Go deeper. Become mentally sharper, emotionally clearer, spiritually fuller. Feedback. Reconnect with your sense of fun. Laugh more. Take up space again, not to prove anything, but because that's who you were before you started making yourself small. Feedback. You're not breaking their ego by trying to make them miss you. You're breaking it by becoming someone they can't access anymore. Not because you block them. Feedback, but because the version of you they knew doesn't even live here anymore. Feedback. When a relationship ends, especially with someone avoidant, there's this deep, almost reflexive urge to be seen, to remind them of what they lost, to show them you're okay, thriving even. Feedback. And it makes sense. You've spent so long being overlooked, misunderstood, emotionally sidelined, that once you're out of it, a part of you wants to be noticed. Feedback. Notice the strength it took to stay, and even more for the courage it took to walk away. So what do most people do? They overcompensate. They post more. They start sharing every move. Feedback. Every gym selfie, every night out. Not always consciously, but as a way of saying, "Hey, look, I'm not broken. I'm still here." It's understandable. But here's the truth. Feedback. The most powerful shift doesn't happen when you try to prove your worth. It happens when you become a mystery again. You see, an avoidant thrives in predictability. Feedback. Not necessarily emotional predictability, but behavioral predictability. Get used to knowing how you respond, what you'll post, when you'll reach out. They know the pattern. Feedback. Even after the breakup, they may assume they can still keep tabs on you, that they still have a window into your life through your stories, your updates, your subtle attempts to be seen. Feedback. So when that window disappears, when your life suddenly becomes harder to track, it disrupts the entire dynamic, because now they're wondering, where did you go? Feedback. Why aren't you posting like before? Why does it feel like they don't know what's happening in your world anymore? It's not that you've gone into hiding. Feedback. It's that you've stopped performing. You've stopped feeding the illusion that they still have access to your emotional energy. And that's what they didn't see coming. Feedback. Reclaiming your mystery is about pulling your energy back from the stage. It's about doing things for yourself that no one sees and finding power in the privacy. Not secrecy, privacy. Feedback. There's a difference. Secrecy is rooted in fear. Privacy is rooted in self-worth. When you stop feeling the need to publicly prove that you're doing fine, you quietly shift the energy. Feedback. You're not trying to convince anyone of anything anymore. You're simply living. And here's what happens. Nexting your absence creates questions. Not just for them, feedback, but for the version of you that used to need their attention. You start asking yourself, why was I so desperate for someone to validate me from a distance? That awareness is everything. Feedback. It means you're waking up to the fact that being watched is not the same as being valued, letting them wonder. Without feeding their curiosity isn't about games. It's about boundaries. Feedback. They lost access to you when they chose distance over depth, when they chose avoidance over communication. And now you're choosing peace over performance. Feedback. Avoidants often return when they feel your energy shifting. It's not because they suddenly became emotionally available. It's because their control is slipping. They no longer know how you feel. Feedback. What you're thinking, whether you're moving on or already gone. And in their world, uncertainty is uncomfortable. They liked having the option of you, the emotional safety net of knowing you still cared. But when you become a mystery again, when you stop narrating your life and start living it, they lose that option. Feedback. And that's when they feel it, because they can't figure you anymore. You've become unpredictable in the most grounded way possible, not chaotic. Feedback, just unavailable to the narrative they once relied on. And the irony is, in their eyes, that makes you more attractive. Model feedback, not in a superficial way, but in the way that triggers something they weren't prepared to feel regret. Regret that they didn't ask more questions, that they didn't try harder. Feedback, they let you walk away thinking you just stay visible, stay available, stay waiting. But now you're not broadcasting your healing journey. You're actually healing, quietly, powerfully. Feedback, out of reach. And the truth is, not everyone deserves a front row seat to your evolution, especially not someone who walked out during your most vulnerable moments. Feedback. They don't get to spectate your glow up. They don't get to witness your rise like they never contributed to your fall. Some things are meant to be experienced privately, sacredly. Feedback by you and by the people who truly showed up. So instead of using your social media as a way to whisper, look at me, in their direction, start using your silence as a declaration. Feedback. I'm not yours to keep tabs on anymore. I let them sit with the version of you thought they'd always understand. Let them feel the discomfort of not knowing. Back. Because the moment you stop being predictable, you become unforgettable. Feedback. There's this unspoken role we take on in relationships with avoidant people, the role of the understanding one, the patient one, the one who tries to see the best in them. Feedback. Even when they pull away, you start giving them excuses in your own mind. Feedback. They've had a tough past. They just need space. They're afraid of intimacy. And maybe all of that is true. But what often gets lost in the process is you, your needs. Feedback, your voice, your truth. Because every time they withdrew, you made yourself smaller. You lowered your expectations. You rationalized the cold behavior. Feedback. You told yourself you were strong enough to handle the silence, the inconsistency, the confusion. And here's what that does. It makes you more and more invisible to yourself until one day, feedback, you wake up and realize you've been so busy being understanding that you stopped being real. This is what avoidant people count on without even realizing it. They count on your empathy. Feedback, they count on your emotional labor. They expect you to keep showing up, to keep holding space, to keep decoding their mixed signals and reading between the lines, because you always have. Feedback. So when you finally flip the script, when you stop trying to make it easy for them to come and go as they please, it shakes the entire foundation. Because now, instead of explaining your silence, feedback, you offer none. Instead of giving them another out, you stop giving them access altogether. And you don't justify it. You don't make a dramatic exit. Feedback. You don't send one last text explaining your boundaries in hopes they'll finally understand. You just stop playing your role in the story. And that's the power shift. Feedback, because avoidants don't fear losing you. They fear losing the version you that always accommodates them. The version who over-functions, who over-explains, who makes their detachment make sense. Feedback. They don't know what to do when you finally stop doing emotional gymnastics to keep the connection alive. When you go quiet without a disclaimer, they feel the absence in a new way. Feedback. It's not just silence, it's consequence. It's you choosing your peace over being understood by someone who never really tried to understand you. And that's hard, right? Feedback. Especially if you're someone who values closure, clarity, kindness. You don't want to be cold or unkind. You don't want to ghost anyone. Feedback. But there comes a point where constantly explaining yourself becomes a self-betrayal. You've already told them how you feel. You've already expressed your needs, your confusion, your pain. Feedback. If they didn't hear it then, they're not going to hear it the 15th time. And every new attempt just chips away at your self-respect. Feedback. So you stop trying to be the exception, the one who helps them grow, the one who waits for their awakening. You let go of the fantasy that if you just love them the right way, feedback, they'll suddenly be ready. You realize that love isn't proven by how much you tolerate. It's proven by how much you refuse to abandon yourself for someone else's comfort. Feedback. And that realization is what they don't see coming. They're used to you being there no matter what. They're used to the safety net of your understanding. When that's gone, feedback. They don't just lose a person, they lose the illusion of emotional control. Suddenly they're the one being left with no explanation. And that discomfort is theirs to sit with. Feedback, because you're no longer trying to fix it. You're not cold, you're clear, you're not cruel, you're done. And here's the thing, when you stop playing the understanding role, feedback, you reclaim your emotional truth. You start asking yourself, what do I need? What do I want in love? What kind of partnership feels safe for me? And the more honest you are with those answers, feedback, the less appealing breadcrumbs and vague connection become. You stop being seduced by potential and start choosing reality. That clarity scares avoidance. Not because you've turned against them, feedback, but because you're no longer available for their patterns. They sense it. Even if they don't have the language for it, they feel it. Feedback. They can feel the shift when you're no longer emotionally accessible, when you're no longer explaining your worth to someone who couldn't hold it, and you don't need to make it dramatic. Feedback. You don't need to announce your power. You just walk with it. You let your silence, your boundaries, your peace say everything for you. Because at the end of the day, you were never too much. Feedback. You were just with someone who didn't know what to do with depth. And now you do. Now you know that flipping the script isn't about revenge. Feedback. It's about refusing to play a role that never honored you to begin with. Feedback. One of the most underestimated power moves you can make after dealing with an avoidant ex is this: rebuild your life in ways they never had access to. Feedback. And not just in a surface level, look at me now kind of way. I'm talking about a full recalibration of your lifestyle, your routine, your social circle, your energy. Feedback, your priorities, so that the life they knew becomes almost unrecognizable. Not because you're pretending to be someone else, feedback, but because you finally made space to become who you were always meant to be. Here's the truth: when someone with an avoidant attachment style lets you go, feedback, they often do it with this silent assumption that you'll always be in emotional reach, that even if you drift apart physically, you'll still be mentally orbiting them. Feedback, that you'll keep checking on them, watching their stories, maybe even waiting subtly for a possible reunion. They count on the fact that you haven't truly let go. Feedback, they know how strong the emotional tie was, and they assume you'll struggle to move forward. That's their safety net. So when you start making real feedback, concrete changes in your life, when you start forming new habits, deepening other relationships, elevating your mindset, shifting your physical environment, they feel it. Feedback, even if they don't say it, even if you're not talking to them anymore, they sense the emotional cord being cut. And here's what's wild: you don't even have to announce it. Feedback. You don't have to post every step of your journey or prove how far you've come. The transformation speaks for itself. Feedback. Because when you stop living a life that leaves the door cracked open for them, that energy shifts completely. You're no longer sending out an invitation. You're sending out a signal that says, feedback. This version of me has outgrown the version of us. It's subtle, but it's powerful. Think about it. When you were with them, how much of your time was spent waiting for them to reply, to commit, to show up, to change? How many moments of your day were built around their availability or mood or readiness? Feedback dynamic slowly chips away at your own sense of autonomy without you even realizing it. You start building your world around someone who barely makes space for you in theirs. So after it ends, feedback, you have a choice. You can keep holding onto the story, replaying the conversation, sitting in that old rhythm, or you can start rewriting the narrative, not just emotionally, but practically. Feedback, new morning routines, new boundaries, new standards, a new social circle that isn't connected to them, a new place to live if you can. Feedback, you change the physical markers of your daily life so that your nervous system no longer expects them to appear. That's not just healing, that's strategy. Feedback, because here's what an avoidant doesn't expect. They don't expect you to detach without bitterness. They don't expect you to rebuild with grace. They assume deep down, feedback, that you'll either be angry, stuck in resentment, feedback, or secretly hoping they'll come back and finally get it. So when you're neither hurt nor hopeful, when you're simply Zagon, that's what actually shakes their ego. Feedback. And not because you set out to break it, but because you moved in silence and left nothing for them to return to. You became someone they don't recognize. Feedback, not because you've changed to spite them, but because you've stepped back into your full self, maybe for the first time in years. And when they finally do check in, feedback, when they send that inevitable "how have you been" message or react to an old photo, they're not just trying to reconnect, they're trying to locate themselves in your new world. Feedback, they're trying to see if the version of you they once knew still exists somewhere inside this upgraded life you've built. But here's the beauty: you don't owe them a doorway back in. Feedback, because this version of you, the one who sleeps peacefully without waiting on a text, the one who laughs louder, thinks clearer, loves deeper without fear, this version is not a performance. Feedback, it's your new reality, a life that doesn't revolve around trying to fix someone's fear of intimacy, a life that doesn't operate on borrowed time and broken promises. Feedback, and maybe the most unexpected twist of all, you no longer want what you were once begging for, not because they changed, but because you did. So when they try to return, whether it's a message, feedback, like a random check-in, it won't hit the same, not because you're being cold, but because they're knocking on a door that no longer exists. Feedback. One of the most disarming things you can do after dealing with an avoidant ex is refuse to carry the narrative they left you with. Feedback, that quiet assumption they made that you'd always define your worth through their inability to love you properly, that you'd internalize their silence, their distance, their emotional withholding as a reflection of your shortcomings. But here's the truth: their emotional unavailability had nothing to do with your value. It wasn't about your beauty, feedback, your heart, your intelligence, your effort. It was about their limitation, their wall, their fear. And the moment you decide not to wear that story anymore, feedback, not to keep replaying what went wrong or why they didn't choose you the way you wanted to be chosen, something shifts, quietly at first, then deeply. You stop looking back and asking, was I not enough? You start asking something far more powerful. Why did I ever think that someone else's inability to show up was my responsibility to fix? Because that's what we do. Feedback, isn't it? When we're emotionally invested, when we're the ones who stayed open while they pulled away, we assume we missed something, said too much, cared too fast, expected too deeply. Feedback. But love isn't wrong just because someone couldn't receive it. That's what they don't expect you to realize. Because an avoidant partner often lives in a subtle power imbalance. Feedback. They don't have to say much to keep you questioning. They don't have to be overly cruel to leave you confused. It's the absence that hurts, the lack of reassurance. Feedback, the way they make you feel too needy just for having basic emotional need. You end up apologizing for wanting clarity, closeness, consistency. And over time, feedback, you start seeing yourself through their distorted lens, as difficult, as too much, as hard to love. But here's where it changes: when you stop accepting that version of yourself. When you wake up one day and say, I no longer accept their silence as truth, that's the moment you reclaim everything. Feedback. Because what breaks their ego isn't just you moving on. It's you rewriting the story. It's you deciding that the chapter they walked out of doesn't define the book. You go back, and instead of romanticizing their emotional absence, you start calling it what it was: avoidance, inconsistency, self-protection masquerading as independence. And suddenly the pedestal crumbles. Feedback, the illusion breaks. You see clearly again. And that clarity is devastating for someone who assumed they'd always hold a certain power over your heart. Because when you stop yearning for closure, feedback, stop needing explanations. Stop imagining different versions of the relationship where it all could have worked out if only you'd bent a little more. When you stop all of that feedback and start grounding yourself in truth, it's not just healing, it's disruptive. It's the kind of growth they can feel from a distance, the kind that says, feedback, you no longer have a say in who I believe I am. That's a different kind of silence, not the wounded, waiting silence they expected, but a liberated silence. Silence that doesn't hold space for their return. A silence that says, back, you no longer get to be the reference point for my worth. And when you live from that place, when your energy stops leaning in and starts pulling back, not out of bitterness, feedback, but from peace, that's what hits them. Because avoidant people are used to being remembered. They're used to staying relevant in your mind even long after they've gone. But now, feedback, they're not just physically out of your life, they're mentally demoted, emotionally irrelevant, not in a cruel way, just in an honest way. Because the truth is, feedback, they never showed up in a way that earned a permanent space in your mind. That's the ego break, not your anger, not your tears, but your indifference, not coldness, but neutrality, calm, grounded feedback, silent neutrality. When they see that their absence no longer defines your presence, when they realize you're not secretly watching their stories, not hoping they'll come back more available, feedback, not even carrying the wound anymore. That's when the shift becomes undeniable. You've outgrown the version of you who waited. You've stepped into the version who sees clearly. Feedback and the ultimate power play. You didn't just walk away. You walked away without their narrative in your hands. You let the guilt, the shame, the confusion, all of it at the door they closed. Feedback, because you finally remembered who you were before they made you question it.